24, Section 2, is about the Gerald Ford presidency and Jimmy Carter's presidency. Oh, excuse me. Okay, so you guys know that Gerald Ford was chosen as Richard Nixon's vice president after his vice president had to resign because of a scandal. So, Gerald Ford, he was supported by Democrats and Republicans because he was known for his integrity, his hard work. He'd been a star football player at the University of Michigan. Then he served in the Navy during World War II, and then he served in Congress for 25 years. He even became the House Minority Leader by 1965. But one of the first things that Gerald Ford did is he pardoned Richard Nixon for his crimes. Now, Richard Nixon, excuse me. What that means for Richard Nixon is that he is officially forgiven for any crimes that he may have committed while president. And he did this in an attempt to heal the nation, like let everybody start recovering from the Watergate scandal, but really it just created problems. For example, people started accusing Ford of pardoning Nixon in exchange for the presidency, because Nixon knew he was probably going to end up resigning or getting kicked out of the presidency, and he made a deal with Gerald Ford. Hey, I'll pick you, you get to be the next president, as long as, you pardon me. And then on top of that, the economy, it wasn't going so hot during Ford's presidency, and that really affected his approval rating. Now, the reason that hit his approval rating so hard is because of Gerald Ford's plan to fight this. During this time period, we had super high inflation, we had skyrocketing prices, and rising unemployment. And so Gerald Ford came up with this plan called Whip Inflation Now. It really didn't work. It was a voluntary plan, and it was an epic failure. He asked people to, conserve. He asked them to voluntarily do things to help with the inflation, and it didn't really work. Demand ended up dropping and unemployment increased even more, and so people, they weren't fans of Gerald Ford. And a lot of them, they had buttons. Gerald Ford wanted everybody to wear the buttons that said win, but they started wearing them upside down, so it said NIM, no instant miracles. Okay, so then we get to the presidential election of 1976, and we're going to see a new face. Obviously, the Republicans, they're going to stay with Gerald Ford, and then the Democrats are going to choose a guy named Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was once the governor of Georgia, but he's basically a political outsider. He is not a career politician. Okay, and he's going to be supported by Christian fundamentalists. Christian fundamentalists are people who believe in a strict literal interpretation of the Bible. You might call them conservatives today. And, Jimmy Carter, he was a Christian. He was proud of that. He was a Sunday school teacher. He still teaches Sunday school today. He's very old, but he's still alive. Okay, and he was the former Georgia governor, like I said before. Carter won by a slim margin. I believe he won just over 50% of the popular vote, where Gerald Ford got 48%. And I think the Electoral College was like 296 or 297 to around 220. So it was actually a pretty close race. But once Jimmy Carter became president, he was the citizens' president. Like, he was this regular, everyday, average guy. He wore casual clothes, you wouldn't always see him in a suit and tie. He might wear just like a collared shirt or something like that. In the presidential parade, when he first gets inaugurated, he walked the distance from the White House to the Capitol building. No president does that anymore, except William Henry Harrison, and after he did that, he got pneumonia and died like a month into his presidency. But Jimmy Carter was very inexperienced. He didn't have very many ties to people in Washington, D.C. But some of the first things that he did, he granted amnesty. That is a political pardon. And he granted this political pardon to draft dodgers of the Vietnam War. Again, he was trying to heal America's political wounds, try and just close that door on Vietnam, but really it just made a lot of people angry that he's forgiving these people who would not fight for their country. And on top of that, we're going to have energy struggles that plague the nation. We have energy shortages. And there's an oil crisis. The price of gas went from 40 cents a gallon to $1.20, and that's a pretty drastic increase. And basically Jimmy Carter's response to the nation's oil crisis was, hey, you guys conserve oil. But we had fuel shortages. Gas stations ran out of gas. Gas stations would only let people fill up half a tank. They would place restrictions on people. People waited in lines for gasoline and they couldn't get it. And so this call on Americans to conserve, it wasn't really very effective. One thing that did happen though, the Federal Reserve, they raised interest rates, and eventually this is going to help curb the inflation. Okay, during this time period, we're going to see that there is going to be a shift. Most presidents and the political power in our country was up in the Midwest and the Northeast, the Rust Belt. But now it's going to move to the Sun Belt, the southern United States. A lot of people come to Oklahoma and Texas to work in the oil field. They go to California to work in defense industries. And so we're going to see that political power shift to the Sun Belt. And a lot of presidents are going to come from the Sun Belt region. And this me generation comes to age. We talk about the me generation because they were focused on like self-improvement and things like that during the 1970s. The counterculture, it's more common now to wear long hair or casual clothes. That's normal. Divorce rates during this time period are going to double, and the number of children born out of wedlock is twice as many as it was prior to this. A big thing that becomes popular is transcendental meditation. It comes from like these Eastern religions, and basically you sit for 30 minutes and you like chant to yourself and think about things, and apparently it was a big deal. Emphasis on personal fitness and health. Okay, just to give you an example, you guys have seen Forrest Gump, right? And he just felt like running. So anyhow, 1970, the New York City Marathon, only about, I want to say it was like 100 people. I think 100 people ran in the New York City Marathon. And then, within 10 years, we've got 14,000 people running in that marathon. We have bodybuilding made popular by Arnold Schwarzenegger. Okay, and so that becomes a big deal during this time period. And we're also going to see a resurgence in fundamental Christianity. Okay, people who are trying to go back to the teachings of the Bible and trying to live a more Christian life. And a lot of this has to do with televangelists, TV preachers. Okay, they were able to reach millions of people over the television. They had radio shows, and some of the most famous, Oral Roberts, there's a university in Tulsa named after him. Pat Robertson, Jerry Falwell, these were all famous preachers. And Falwell forms the moral majority. Moral majority is just going to be a group of people who essentially try to vote based off of Christian principles. You know, we're going to vote against abortion. We're going to vote in favor of conservative things. We're going to want prayer in schools, things of that nature. Okay. And so religious conservatives in the 1970s, they would oppose things like legalized abortion, things of that nature. And also during the 1970s, we're going to see that not only does the population largely shift to the Sun Belt, but also many immigrants are going to arrive in the United States from Latin America and from Asia as well.